In the summertime 50 years ago, it was common for parents to tell kids to be home by the time the streetlights came on. It was also common for cities to enforce curfews, picking kids up for just being out past 10 or so. That practice has fallen by the wayside in many California cities, but not in San Diego. Kate, start by telling us what the legal curfew is. What are the rules here?
Well, so that's actually a little bit more complicated than you might think, because each city can set local ordinances for what the curfew times are. So curfews apply to anybody under the age of 18. And within the city of San Diego proper, it's from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. In the county, it's actually from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. So if you're outside of the city limits, but within the county, you can be out, I guess, an hour earlier in the morning than you can if you're in the city. And then other cities around the county have their own times, which vary from starting at 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. and can end anywhere from 5 a.m., 5:30 a.m., 6 a.m. One of them ends at sunrise, whenever that is. So I think
a movable one. Yeah.
Right. So I think if parents know their kids are crossing these different lines, they really need to pay attention to what the times are in the different places, or the kid might be stuck out late, even though where their address is, technically it might not be.
Okay. Now, your story noted that other cities, Los Angeles, San Bernardino, for a couple, they've stopped doing these sweeps. Why don't they do them there?
They told me that they've decided to put the limited resources that they have in terms of working with juveniles into programming that has more directly positive interactions with police, so in a non-enforcement situation. So let's do activities together, let's have mentorship programs, let's have cadet programs. The San Bernardino Police Department told me they are just about to launch a police activities league, which is something that we do also have here in San Diego called Star Pal. But they're just about to launch that as well, and given the resources that they have, they think that that's a much better way to get youth engaged and involved in a way that's going to keep them out of trouble.
And San Diego now is responsible for a big portion of these statewide, right, in terms of these curfew pickups.
Yes, in the last 10 years, it's gone from about 7% of the state share of curfew arrests to about 30%. So we take a very serious chunk of those curfew arrests, second only to LA, which is a much bigger city than us.
All right, so walk us through this in San Diego. What happens when a teenager is arrested for curfew violation? Are they put into the system?
Well, so I actually got to go on a ride along with the police and see for myself how this happens. So when they see a youth who is out after curfew, they'll stop them. They'll say, "How old are you?" They'll ask them a few questions about, like, are you in school, that sort of thing. Get a little bit of a sense of what's going on with the youth. They put the youth in handcuffs, they pat them down, they put them in the back of the police car, and they drive them to police station. At that point, they are offered the option of a diversion program, which keeps them out of the court system, and depending on which district they're in, they're allowed to
district being a school district?
Or which division, I'm sorry,
okay.
Which division they're in.
Okay.
They're contracted out to different organizations to do that diversion work. So they might end up in one youth program or another. That basically looks at, well, what does this youth need to stay out of trouble, to get back on the right track, that sort of thing, and provides different kinds of classes or community work depending on what that youth needs in order to get back on track. So most of them end up going through that kind of programming, which is free, so they don't end up paying anything.
And parents are called right there to the station?
Parents are called to the station to pick up their kid. They go through the paperwork together. And then they're later processed by whichever organization is doing that diversion programming.
Okay.
If they don't complete the diversion program, so let's say they miss classes, or let's say that they opt not to complete it, they end up going through court and paying a fine that can be up to about $250.
For the actual curfew offense itself. Okay, now who's being caught up in these sweeps? First of all, how often do they do them? And they're not doing sweeps every night, are they?
No, they're not doing sweeps every night. I mean, if they see, when they're out on their regular patrols, if they see someone who they think is breaking curfew, they're probably going to stop and ask, but they're not out specifically for that most of the time. It depends on the division. According to SCPD, they said they leave it up to the command for each division.
What else they have going on, other crimes they're chasing down.
Right, and how big a problem they think youth crime or youth victimization is in their area. I went to the Southern Division, and the commander there, or the sergeant there, told me that they do them about once a month.
Okay.
But I think it varies quite a bit by division.
Okay, and generally, how can we characterize what kids tend to get caught up in this, or is it a real broad cross-section?
Well, when you look at the data from the Office of the Attorney General, it definitely does disproportionately affect youth of color. So when you look at the percentage breakdown, almost half of the curfew arrests are of Hispanic youth. And then the black percentage is about over 16%, whereas the population here in San Diego is only about 5%. So that's significantly more than
disproportionate, yeah.
Right, what you would expect. And then in terms of white youth, it's actually quite a bit less than the population. It's only 25% of the arrests are of white youth.
Okay.
So,
well, then that brings us up to the idea that some groups here are objecting to the use of these sweeps. Who's objecting, and what are their main concerns?
So I talked specifically to the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, and they're concerned anytime that there's disproportionate strategies that are affecting communities of color. Just given the histories of what's happened in those communities tend to have lower income levels, have a lot of different obstacles that they're facing. Those kids oftentimes have a lot more obstacles that they're facing because of the situations that are going on. And so I think what they're doing is questioning whether this is the most effective strategy for reaching those youth and keeping them on a good path. I think the police and the ACLU at the end of the day have the same goal, which is for youth to be safe and for youth to be successful in life, you know.
Yeah, if they're headed for trouble, somebody wants to head that off, and adult intervene. And
I think there's disagreement about the best way to do that. The ACLU thinks, you know, given the way that communities of color often receive policing and have historically received policing, it can be very traumatic for those youth to be stopped. Even if they are on their way home from something that would give them an exemption under the curfew law. Like there are certain things that you can be out after that time doing or on your way home from, and even just having the stop can aggravate some of those feelings because of the history there, and I think that's the concern.
And is that one of the reasons some of the other cities here, and Chula Vista is one that's not doing this much anymore, is that among the reasons that they've cut back?
They didn't cite any kind of racial issue as one of their reasons. They spoke more generally about how youth feel with police. But I think you know, whether you're a youth of color or not, like that feeling is something to think about. Are
we seeing other charges in these curfew arrests? I mean, you wind up with drug charges or weapons charges or things like that? You
can, like if they find a youth who is out late doing something illegal, they'll be charged with that, and then probably also charged with violating curfew.
Curfew might have been the probable cause to engage in the first place.
Right, or I mean, if you see somebody out doing graffiti at night and they happen to be under 18, like they're also going to get charged with violating curfew, you know. But when they do the curfew sweeps, they're particularly just looking for kids walking around who are out too late.
Okay. All right, last question, Kate. Any way to monitor how effective this is here in San Diego and how it's working?
So that, I think, is the thing that maybe is still missing. And sort of the question that was raised in my article is this effective? And I think it's something that has not been measured. There's a lot of studies out there sort of looking generally around the country, like our curfew enforcement effective? And for most of the studies, it's a very mixed result. Some are like, oh, well, crime went up. Some say crime went down. And it's hard to say whether or not it's been effective here. When you look at juvenile crime data in general, we haven't changed that much over the last decade or more.
So it's hard to tell what the impact is.
Right. We've been the same share of California's juvenile felonies and juvenile misdemeanors. When you look at San Bernardino, they've actually gone down in the same time frame, which is sort of interesting. But again, we don't know why, you know, so you can't really draw any conclusions from that. And the academics who I spoke with were really emphatic about asking for more measurement. Right. So I think that's maybe something for conversation.
All right. Well, it's a great story. Appreciate it.